If anyone here has cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace.
Wait! That baby isn't yours. Because there is no baby!
The officiant had just said the words, "If anyone here has cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace." Nobody ever speaks. That line is a formality, a tradition, a breath between vows and forever. Until today, the church doors opened. Not gently, not apologetically. They opened the way doors open when the person behind them has never asked permission to enter a room in his life. 6 men in dark suits walked in first. They didn't sit. They stood at the exits, along the walls, at the end of every pew, creating a geometry of controlled space that turned a house of worship into something else entirely. Then he walked through, a man in a black suit carrying a manila folder. He walked past 200 guests who had turned in their seats with expressions ranging from confusion to alarm. He walked past the flower arrangements and the unity candles and the program that listed the bride's late father as "Forever in Our Hearts." He walked to the altar rail and stopped. He did not look at the bride. He looked at the groom, and he said in a voice that was quiet enough for intimacy and loud enough for every person in that church to hear, "That baby isn't yours." Because there is no baby. The groom's face went blank. Not surprised, blank. The specific blankness of a man whose operating system has just crashed because a stranger has said the one sentence that was never supposed to be spoken out loud. The man in the black suit opened the folder. "And since we're here," he said, "everyone in this room should know what the groom actually came to steal. He faked her pregnancy, forged a sonogram, drugged her food, and designed a wedding to steal $47 million from a dead man's daughter. The Korean Mafia Boss just walked in with proof. If you already want to see this groom destroyed, subscribe right now, because what happens next is going to make you stand up from your chair. Let's go." 6 weeks before the folder, 6 weeks before the church, 6 weeks before the most expensive lie in Georgia wedding history collapsed at the altar, Grace Adeyemi was trying on her wedding dress. She stood in front of a 3-panel mirror in an Atlanta bridal boutique, and for the first time since her father died, she felt something that wasn't grief. She felt hopeful. Grace was 28 years old, Nigerian-American, born in Houston, raised by a man named Ade Adeyemi, who had arrived in Texas with $400 and a degree in structural engineering, and had spent 30 years turning those two things into the Adeyemi Development Corporation, the largest Black-owned real estate company in the American South, $47 million in assets, commercial properties across 6 states, a legacy built with bare hands, and an immigrant's refusal to accept the word impossible. Ade died 2 years ago, cancer, the kind that gives you 6 months of warning and then takes everything in 3. He left everything to Grace. The company, the properties, the responsibility, and the loneliness. Grace was brilliant at running the company. She had her father's head for structure and her mother's instinct for people. The board respected her. The tenants trusted her. The numbers were strong. But she was 26 and alone and grieving and carrying the weight of a legacy that felt like it belonged to someone larger than her, even though her father had spent her entire life telling her she was exactly the right size. Then Ethan appeared. Ethan Cole, 32, white, American. A struggling architect who designed buildings he said he couldn't afford to build. He had a self-deprecating smile and a way of looking at Grace that made her feel like the most important structure in any room. They met at a charity gala, or so Grace thought. What actually happened was that Ethan's mother, Sandra Cole, had identified Grace at a real estate industry conference 6 months earlier and spent half a year mapping Grace's life, her schedule, her social circle, her vulnerabilities, grief, loneliness, her desire for family, and her estate structure. Sandra was a former corporate lawyer. disbarred for stealing from her own clients. She had learned one useful thing from the legal profession: how to read a contract well enough to write one that looked protective but functioned as a trap. She coached Ethan through everything: what to wear to the gala, what to say, how to make his interest seem accidental, how to be charming without being aggressive, how to make a wealthy woman believe she was being seen, not targeted. It worked. Ethan proposed after 6 months. Grace said yes. Her mother said, "Too fast." Grace said, "I know what I feel." Her mother said nothing else, because she remembered what it felt like to be young and certain, and she didn't want to be the kind of mother who crushed certainty with caution. Then came the pregnancy. 3 months before the wedding, Grace fainted at a dinner party. She had been feeling off for weeks, nauseous in the mornings, exhausted by noon, gaining weight in places she couldn't explain. She assumed it was stress. The company was expanding. The wedding was approaching. Grief still hit in waves. Ethan rushed her to a doctor. Not her doctor. His doctor, a man named Ryan Mercer, who had a clean office, a warm smile, and a medical degree from a mid-tier school that Sandra had verified, was just legitimate enough to hold up to a surface-level check. Ryan Mercer was Ethan's college roommate. He had been suspended from practicing medicine in 2 states for falsifying patient records. He was currently operating under a reinstated license in Georgia that nobody at the state board had reviewed closely because nobody had filed a recent complaint. Mercer ran tests, drew blood, did an ultrasound, printed a sonogram. Then he sat Grace down with a warm, professional smile and said, "Congratulations, you're about 8 weeks along." Grace cried. Ethan cried. The crying was real for one of them. The truth was chemical. For 6 weeks before the fainting episode, Ethan had been adding a hormonal compound to Grace's morning smoothies. Not a drug exactly, a fertility supplement available online from unregulated international pharmacies, containing a combination of synthetic progesterone and HCG precursors. The side effects matched early pregnancy almost perfectly. Nausea, fatigue, breast tenderness, missed periods, weight gain. Grace's body was responding to chemicals it had never consented to receive. The sonogram on their mantle was downloaded from a stock medical image website. Mercer had printed it on the correct paper, added Grace's name and a date, and presented it as if he had just captured it from her body. Grace never questioned it. She had no reason to. She was tired, nauseous, and her doctor, who she had no reason to distrust because Ethan had chosen him specifically for his convincing bedside manner, confirmed what the symptoms suggested. She bought a onesie, yellow. It said "Daddy's Girl" in embroidered script. She put it in the nursery she had started decorating. She talked to the baby. At night, alone, with her hands on her belly, she talked to a child that did not exist. She told it about its grandfather. The final piece was the document. Ethan suggested the prenup. "To protect your assets, babe. I don't want anyone thinking I'm with you for money." Grace thought it was sweet, thoughtful, the kind of thing a man who genuinely didn't care about money would suggest. Sandra wrote every word. The first 29 pages were standard. Asset protection, inheritance segregation, boilerplate language that any competent attorney would approve without concern. Page 30 was where the architecture lived, Clause 14b, buried in a subsection titled Marital Estate Integration Contingent Provisions, stated that upon the solemnization of marriage, controlling operational interest in any closely held business entity owned by either party would transfer to the marital estate, with equal decision-making authority granted to both spouses. In plain English, the moment Grace said, "I do," Ethan would gain equal control of her father's company. Combined with power of attorney provisions buried 4 pages later, he would effectively own the Adeyemi Development Corporation within 90 days of the wedding. Grace's lawyer reviewed the prenup. He was competent, but not adversarial. Ethan was a struggling architect with no visible assets, so the idea that the prenup was designed as an offensive weapon never crossed his mind. Sandra had counted on that. The wedding was set for Saturday. The church was booked. The flowers were ordered. The trap was set. He drugged her food for 6 weeks, faked a sonogram, used a suspended doctor, and designed a prenup that would steal her dead father's entire company the second she said, "I do." Grace has no idea. She's decorating a nursery for a baby that doesn't exist. And the Korean Mafia Boss? He just got the background check results. Drop A if you already want this groom in handcuffs. Subscribe, the wedding crash is coming. Kim Do-han did not know Grace Adeyemi. He knew her father's company. For 2 years, Do-han's legitimate construction portfolio had been pursuing a partnership with Adeyemi Development Corporation. The Adeyemi Properties commercial real estate across the American South would complement his syndicate's Asian and European holdings. The deal was worth significant money to both sides. When his team learned that Grace was marrying Ethan Cole, standard protocol engaged, a background check on any individual entering the orbit of a potential business partner. Do-han's people were thorough in ways that standard private investigators were not. They didn't just check public records. They checked sealed records. They didn't just verify employment, they verified the existence of the employer. They didn't just review the prenup, they had it analyzed by 3 contract attorneys who specialized in asset, seizure, and fraud. Sergeant Park delivered the findings on a Tuesday afternoon. Do-han read the file in his study in Seoul. Black suit, reading glasses, a cup of tea growing cold on his desk. The file contained: Ethan Cole had no architecture license. His firm was a P.O. box registered 6 months before he met Grace. He had been engaged 3 times before, each time to a wealthy woman, each time the engagement collapsed when the scheme was detected. One victim had filed a restraining order. Another had pursued a civil fraud case that was sealed as part of a settlement. Sandra Cole was disbarred in 2019 for misappropriating client funds. She had designed every prenup in every one of Ethan's engagements. She was the architect. He was the instrument. Dr. Ryan Mercer's medical license had been suspended twice. His reinstatement in Georgia had been rubber-stamped without proper review. The sonogram's digital metadata, the information embedded in the image file, showed it was created on a stock medical photography website, not generated by an ultrasound machine. And the smoothies. Do-han's pharmaceutical analyst identified a hormonal compound available through unregulated online pharmacies, a compound that, taken daily for 4 to 6 weeks, would produce symptoms indistinguishable from early pregnancy. Do-han closed the file. He had met Ade Adeyemi once, briefly, at a development conference in Singapore 4 years ago. They had spoken for 12 minutes about foundation engineering techniques for coastal soil. Ade had been specific, knowledgeable, and humble in the way that only people who truly understand their craft can be. That man had spent 30 years building something real, and now a con artist in a rented tuxedo was going to steal it from his daughter using a fake baby and a poisoned smoothie. Do-han took off his reading glasses. "When is the wedding?" he asked. "Saturday, 2 p.m., Atlanta. Prepare the documents. Print everything. I want the file organized chronologically. The scheme, the evidence, the chemical analysis, the prenup clause. 3 copies. Should I contact Miss Adeyemi's legal team? No. Her legal team missed the prenup clause. They'll have an opportunity to be embarrassed later." He paused. "I'll deliver it myself." Sergeant Park looked at him. "Personally, sir? I met her father. He talked about her for 9 of our 12 minutes together. He called her my greatest structure." Do-han stood. "A man who says that about his daughter, his legacy doesn't get stolen by someone who can't even forge a convincing sonogram." "The metadata was unusually sloppy," Park agreed. "Amateurs," Do-han said. "Book the flight." The church was beautiful. White roses on every pew, candlelight in the windows. 200 guests, Grace's Nigerian community in full celebration colors, Ethan's side sparse and muted, the contrast between a family that fills rooms and a family that hides in corners visible from the doorway. Grace walked down the aisle alone. Her father wasn't there to walk her. She carried a small photograph of him pinned to her bouquet, his face, smiling, tucked among white roses, the closest thing to his presence she could manage. She was stunning. White gown with delicate lace, Her natural black hair in an elegant updo adorned with small gold pins. Her hand resting on her belly, the belly she believed held a baby. Full natural makeup that enhanced her deep brown skin, which glowed under the candlelight like something sacred. She was the most beautiful thing in that church. She was also the most deceived. Ethan stood at the altar. White tuxedo, perfect posture. The smile he had been trained to deliver, warm, emotional. The smile of a man who loved his bride, and not the smile of a man calculating the value of the real estate portfolio he was about to acquire. Sandra sat in the front row, navy dress, pearl earrings, the composed face of a woman watching the final act of a play she had spent 18 months directing. The vows were exchanged. Grace's vows were real. She spoke about building, about legacy, about her father's hands and how they built things that stood, about wanting to build a family with the same care. 200 people cried. Ethan's vows were performed. They were well written. Sandra had helped with those too. They contained the word forever 3 times and the word honest twice, which, given the circumstances, was a specific kind of cruelty. The officiant smiled, opened his book. If anyone here has cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace. Silence. 1 second. 2 seconds. The officiant began to close his book. The church doors opened. They entered the way Duhan's people always entered, without rush, without aggression, with the absolute precision of men who had done this in different rooms across different countries for different reasons. 6 men, dark suits. They filled exits and aisle ends the way water fills a glass, completely, quietly, without splashing. Then Duhan. He walked down the center aisle in a black suit and a black shirt, open at the collar, where the dark edge of a tattoo crept above the fabric on the right side of his neck. He was 34, Korean, lean. His jawline could have been drafted by the architect his target pretended to be. He carried a manila folder. Not a weapon, not a threat. A folder. He stopped at the altar rail. 200 people stared. Grace stared. Ethan's smile vanished. Not gradually, like a switch had been flipped behind his face. Duhan looked at Ethan first, then at Grace. "I apologize for the interruption," he said. His English was precise, accented, unhurried. "But the woman in this dress deserves to know what the man in this tuxedo has been doing for the last 18 months. He opened the folder. "This is the sonogram on your mantle," he said, placing a printed page on the altar. "And this is the stock photography website it was downloaded from. The metadata matches. The timestamps match. The image does not belong to you, Miss Adeyemi, because no ultrasound was ever performed." Grace's hand went to her belly. "This is the chemical analysis of a compound found in your kitchen in a container labeled as a prenatal vitamin supplement." A second page. "The compound is a synthetic hormonal mixture that produces symptoms identical to early pregnancy. Nausea, fatigue, weight gain, missed periods. You have been ingesting it daily for approximately 6 weeks." The church was so quiet that the candles sounded loud. "There is no baby," Duhan said. Not cruelly, not dramatically, with the specific gentleness of a man who understood that this sentence would hurt worse than anything the groom had ever done. The pregnancy was fabricated to accelerate a marriage that was designed to activate this. He placed the prenup on the altar, opened to page 30, circled in red, clause 14. "Upon marriage, your father's company, every property, every asset, every dollar of the $47 million he spent his life building transfers to the marital estate. And this man," he looked at Ethan, "gains controlling interest. Not because he earned it, not because he built it, because he forged a pregnancy test and poisoned your breakfast." He placed the final documents. "The groom has been engaged 3 times before, each time to a wealthy woman. Each time the engagement was terminated when the fraud was discovered. His mother, seated in the front row, was disbarred for stealing from her own clients. She wrote the prenup. She designed the scheme. She coached every word he ever said to you." He closed the folder. The church didn't breathe. Grace stood at the altar in her wedding dress, one hand still on her belly, the belly she had talked to every night, the belly she had bought a onesie for, the belly that held nothing but the chemical residue of a man's greed. She looked at Ethan. "The smoothies," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but the church was so silent it carried to the last pew. "You made me a smoothie every morning. You said it was for the baby." Ethan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Is there a baby?" she asked. Even now, even with the folder open on the altar, she needed to hear him say it. He looked at the floor. "Is there a baby?" "Grace, yes or no?" The word came out of him like something being surgically removed. "No." Grace's hand slid off her belly. The church exhaled. Sandra stood from the front pew. "This is slander. This man is disrupting a private ceremony, and I will have him arrested for—" "Ma'am," Duhan's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Your disbarment records are in this folder. Your son's prior engagements are in this folder. The sealed civil fraud settlement from his second attempt is in this folder, and the 2 police officers waiting in the vestibule have questions about the forged medical documents that bear your signature as notary." Sandra's face went the color of the church walls. The side door of the church opened. 2 officers entered. "I suggest," Duhan said, "that you remain seated." The church emptied slowly. Grace's mother reached her first, then her aunties, then the wall of Nigerian women who had watched this girl grow up and who formed a physical barrier between Grace and the rest of the room with the practiced efficiency of women who have been protecting each other for generations. Ethan tried to leave through the side door. The officers were already there. Sandra tried to leave through the back. Sergeant Park was already there. Grace sat in the front pew, still in her dress, the bouquet with her father's photograph in her lap. She looked at the photo, his face, smiling, surrounded by white roses, and she said nothing for a long time. Duhan stood at a distance. He didn't approach. He didn't comfort. He waited, because the woman in the pew had just lost a pregnancy, a fiancé, and a future in the span of 3 minutes, and the last thing she needed was another man telling her what to feel. After a long silence, Grace looked up. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Kim Duhan." "Why?" It was a complete question. It contained everything. Why did you do this? Why do you care? Why are you here? Why was any of this real? "I met your father once," Duhan said, briefly, "at a conference in Singapore. We spoke for 12 minutes, about foundation engineering. He spent 9 of those minutes talking about you." A pause. "He called you his greatest structure. And I don't allow people to demolish structures that were built with that kind of love." Grace looked at him for a long time. "You crashed my wedding. I stopped a robbery. The wedding was already compromised. That's not comfort. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be accurate." She almost smiled. Almost. The kind of almost smile that happens when something true lands in a place where everything else has been false. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Thank me when you've had your own doctor confirm what's in that folder. Trust nothing from today, including me, until you've verified it yourself." She looked at him, this man who had just demolished her wedding and was now telling her to verify his claims independently before trusting him. "That's either the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me," she said, "or the most strategic." "It's both," he said. "I find that honesty is the most effective strategy." Grace saw her own doctor the next morning. Not Ethan's doctor, hers. The one she had used for 5 years before Ethan redirected her to Mercer. The exam confirmed everything in the folder. She was not pregnant. She had never been pregnant. Her hormone levels showed the specific pattern of exogenous hormonal exposure chemicals introduced from outside the body. The nausea, the fatigue, the symptoms she had attributed to carrying a child all manufactured. She sat in the doctor's office, and the grief that hit her was not about Ethan. It was about the baby. The baby she had named. The baby she had talked to. The baby she had told about her father lying in bed at night with her hands on her belly, whispering stories about a grandfather the child would never meet, not knowing the child would never exist. She had grieved her father for 2 years. Now she was grieving a child who had never been real. "How do you mourn something that never existed?" she asked her mother that night. Her mother held her. "The love was real," her mother said. "Even if the baby wasn't. You loved that child, Grace. And that love doesn't go away just because the truth changed. It just has nowhere to land." Ethan Cole was arrested and charged with fraud, forgery, and administering noxious substances. Sandra Cole was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory to poisoning. Dr. Ryan Mercer's license was permanently revoked. He was charged with falsifying medical records and practicing under fraudulent pretenses. The prenup was voided. A judge reviewed Clause 14b and called it the most calculated piece of contractual fraud this court has reviewed in a decade. Ethan's 3 prior victims came forward. 3 women from 3 states, each with the same story. The charming architect, the accelerated engagement, the prenup designed to consume. One woman had lost her business. Another had spent 2 years in litigation recovering assets Sandra had already begun transferring. The pattern was 8 years old. Grace was the 4th. She was almost the most lucrative. He didn't call, he didn't visit, he didn't push. But things happened. Grace's legal team was reinforced by 3 attorneys who specialized in asset recovery fraud. They arrived without explanation and charged nothing. Her company's board received a comprehensive stability analysis that prevented investor panic after the wedding story broke publicly. The analysis was prepared by a consulting firm whose client list was not publicly available. A security detail appeared at her home and at the Adeyemi development offices, professional, discreet, and apparently funded by someone who had no intention of being thanked. 3 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived at Grace's home. Heavy cream paper, precise handwriting. "Miss Adeyemi, I understand that what happened at the church may have felt like destruction. I hope by now it has begun to feel like prevention. Your father built something that deserved to be protected. You deserve the same. I don't expect contact. I expect only that you verify everything before trusting anyone, including me. KDH." Grace read the letter 3 times. She verified everything. Every claim in the folder. Every document. Every date. It was all true. She picked up her phone and called the number written on the back of the letter. A man answered. Calm voice. Military cadence. "Sergeant Park speaking. Someone named KDH sent me a letter." A pause. Then, "He was hoping you'd call, Miss Adeyemi." They met. Not in Seoul. Not in a compound or an office or a restaurant where he owned the building. In Atlanta, at a coffee shop Grace chose, public, neutral, on her terms. Duhan arrived alone. No security visible, though Grace suspected they were nearby because she was learning how his world operated. He was different in person than he had been at the altar. Quieter, less commanding. He asked about the company with genuine technical interest, the same foundation engineering curiosity that had connected him to her father in 12 minutes in Singapore. She asked about his world. He told her, more honestly than he had told anyone. He told her what the tattoo meant, what the men in suits represented, what the legitimate business portfolio sat on top of. "You're dangerous," she said. "To people who deserve it," he said. "Never to you." That's what the last man said. He turned out to be poisoning my breakfast. Duhan looked at her. Not flinching, not defending. "The difference," he said, "is that I told you to verify everything before trusting me, and you did, and I was telling the truth." A pause. "The man who poisoned you told you to trust him and never verify anything. That is how you distinguish between someone who wants your trust and someone who wants your blindness." Grace was quiet for a long time. "My father would have liked you," she said. "He would have investigated me thoroughly first. And then liked you. That," Duhan said, "is the correct order. Trust built the way it does between 2 people who have both been trained by life, by profession, by loss to be careful, slowly, with evidence. with the specific patience of two structures being joined at the foundation rather than the roof. He was protective in ways she had to learn to accept, not controlling, but watchful, a perimeter, not a cage. He understood that a woman who had been chemically manipulated by someone she loved was going to have a complicated relationship with trust for a long time. She was independent in ways he had to learn to respect. She didn't need his money, his connections, or his power. She needed his honesty. That was harder for him to give than any of the other things, because honesty required vulnerability, and vulnerability was not a skill his world rewarded. But he gave it, because the woman who sat across from him in an Atlanta coffee shop and told him to prove the difference between protection and control was the first person who had ever asked him to be something other than dangerous. Ethan Cole was convicted on all charges, sentenced to 9 years. The judge noted the sustained, deliberate, and predatory nature of the fraud and the particular cruelty of fabricating a pregnancy to manipulate a grieving woman. Sandra Cole, 6 years. Conspiracy, fraud, accessory to chemical battery. Dr. Ryan Mercer, license permanently revoked, 3 years. In the courtroom, Grace did not speak during sentencing. She sat in the gallery and listened, and when it was over, she walked out without looking at any of them. She had said everything she needed to say in her victim impact statement the day before. One sentence, delivered without emotion. He didn't just steal my future. He stole a child I had already started to love. The courtroom had been very quiet after that. Adeyemi Development Corporation did not just survive, it expanded. The partnership with Duhan's construction syndicate, the deal that had started as due diligence and ended with a man crashing a wedding, was signed 4 months after the trial. Their first joint project broke ground in the spring, a mixed-use development in Atlanta that combined Adeyemi's commercial expertise with Duhan's international construction infrastructure. Grace ran the project the way her father would have, meticulous, personal, present. She walked the site in a hard hat and knew every contractor by name. Duhan watched her work the way he watched everything she did, with focused, quiet attention and the specific respect of a man who understood what it meant to build something real. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, Grace and Duhan stood on the roof of the first building their partnership had completed, Atlanta skyline at sunset, the city her father had helped build stretching out below them. "You walked into my wedding with a folder," Grace said. "You walked out of that church with everything your father built intact," he said. "You could have sent an email. Emails get ignored. Folders delivered by men with neck tattoos at wedding altars do not." She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that filled the rooftop and made the sunset warmer. "My father called me his greatest structure," she said. He was right. He also said the best structures are built with partners. Duhan looked at her, the woman who had stood at an altar and learned that everything she believed was a lie and had not broken, who had grieved a child that never existed and come back to work on Monday, who had verified every word he said before trusting a single one. "Is that an offer?" he asked. "It's an observation," she said. "The offer depends on whether you can keep up. I walked into a church full of 200 people and dismantled an 18-month fraud in 3 minutes. I think I can manage." She took his hand. He held it the way he held everything that mattered, carefully, completely, with the understanding that some things, once built, are not meant to be let go. Below them, the city glittered. Behind them, a building stood. And somewhere in a federal facility in Virginia, Ethan Cole sat in a cell and thought about a manila folder, a single folder, carried by a man he had never met, containing documents he had assumed no one would ever find, and tried to understand how 30 years of scheming had been ended by 12 minutes of conversation in Singapore between two men who respected what it meant to build something real. He would never understand. Some men never do. And that is what happens when you fake a pregnancy, poison a woman's food, and try to steal a dead man's legacy. Ethan Cole spent 18 months building the perfect trap, a fake identity, a fake pregnancy, A prenup designed to swallow a $47 million empire. He thought he had everything covered. The doctor, the drugs, the documents. He didn't cover the Korean Mafia boss who was running a background check. Doohan didn't walk into that church to be a hero. He walked in because a man he met for 12 minutes at a conference had talked about his daughter for 9 of them and called her his greatest structure. And Doohan does not let people demolish things that were built with that kind of love. But here's what makes Grace different. She didn't just survive the con. She verified everything in that folder before trusting the man who brought it. She grieved a baby that never existed and went back to work. She built the partnership. She ran the company. She was never the victim, she was the target who refused to fall. If this story hit different, smash that like button. Subscribe if you're new. We drop stories this powerful every single week. Comment below. What was your moment? The fake sonogram? Is there a baby, yes or no? The folder at the altar? Or that line about the greatest structure? I'm reading every comment. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being someone's target is not the same as being someone's victim. I'll see you in the next one. Don't be late.